thousands, maybe a couple tens of thousands ultimately. I mean, they were building a city with a gigantic ziggurat that went up into the clouds. I mean, they would have had multiple tens of thousands of people living in this one area. I mean, it's just really kind of an astounding picture.
And when we moved up to, this kind of reminds me, when I moved up to Chicago, we lived in Naperville, and here you don't have as many nationalities speaking all kinds of languages. It was the first time that we took the kids, they were little, went to this fall festival thing. Of course, it was a lot of people. We stood there, and I looked around, and I thought, there is nobody speaking English.
Wow.
There were all kinds of, because it's very
Yeah. Eclectic.
eclectic and just a lot of different. You heard Russian, you heard Polish, you heard Japanese, you heard. I mean, we stood there and I go, there's nobody speaking English, and it was just kind of reminds me of this. We looked around and thought, where are we? Almost.
When America had the big, immigrant pushes, right? All of the immigrants that came through Ellis Island, kinds of that time frame, right? What did all of those people groups do?
Moved together.
They all congregated together and created neighborhoods in whatever city they went to.
Yeah.
So you had an Italian neighborhood, and you had a Polish neighborhood, and you had a Russian neighborhood, and then you had the Italian Roman Catholic Church, and you had the Polish Roman Catholic Church, and you had the Russian Orthodox Church, and you had the Latvian Orthodox, right? You had a neighborhood church. So you go into some cities and you see like 8 steeples within a mile of each other. Downtown St. Louis, the Soulard area in St. Louis, where our first LCMS congregation is, Trinity. Literally, when you stand up on the roof of Trinity, you can see like 8 or 10 steeples in the immediate surrounding, and because they all just congregated together because of the common language, right? So everybody congregates where the spoken language is, right? So makes sense that they would not have continued to live together. They would have separated and been their own people group. And I want to emphasize, some would have still followed Yahweh. Some would have worshipped Yahweh. Some would have developed other gods. Some would have probably had no gods. And some would have had like a pantheon of gods, right? So pick and choose what God you want to serve, right? I don't think we should have this view that, oh, now everybody is wicked. I don't think that's the idea. You have to notice that.
Question 7 says, what will God do one day, according to Zephaniah 3:9? In what ways was the event described in Acts the beginning of a reversal of Babel?
People could not understand it. People could understand. I mean, it would from people that can't understand too. So
Pure speech.
Yeah.
They were during Pentecost, they were all able to hear in their own language. So that temporarily bridged this divide between language barriers in proclaiming the gospel, and it reflects what will happen when we're all together. When Christ returns, we will all be able to speak the same language, but we sort of do still speak the same language because we proclaim the gospel with one voice. So like even Christians in Africa or China or Russia or what have you, we proclaim the gospel together in one voice.
Or we can just all hear each other and understand. Like we did at
I said I wonder what language it's going to be.
Yeah, I don't know.
There you go.
Latin, as someone once said, is the Lord's English. Any questions before we move on to day 2? I don't think we need to read that because that's all like just names after names after names.
It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun giving your lay people names to read.
We did that last time. I led in the evening session, and people were like, "What does this mean?" But we could, I think I just want to read verses 27 to 32, because I think that's kind of like the main focus of this section of day 2.
You want me to start? So
Sure,
you don't talk-
yeah.
Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in Ur of the Chaldeans.
And Abraham and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah.
And Sarah was barren, she had no children, had no child. Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarah, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.
So this question 8, this chapter introduces us to two main characters in Genesis, Abram and his wife Sarai. Later God would change their names. What would their new names be?
Abraham and Sarah.
Yep, Abraham and Sarah. So Abram means exalted father, and then when he's renamed by God, his name is Abraham, which means father of many peoples. Because through him, or am I stealing my own thunder later on? Anyway,
Probably, but
yeah,
that's
who cares?
always okay.
Through Abraham, all nations will be blessed. So he is the father of many peoples. And Sarah means, I think it means princess, but I have to
I believe that's correct.
double check.
Yeah, I thought I read that in
Yeah.
a note or something.
Yeah, I've read that somewhere also.
The text, at least I wrote down, kings of peoples shall come from her,
Mhm,
so.
yeah.
It's the royal.
So, question 9 says, Terah and his son Abram lived originally in Ur. Ur was a wealthy city of 250,000 people, advanced in the arts and sciences. So, what command did Abram receive when he lived in Ur?
Leave your country and your people and go to the country I will show you.
Yep, go into the land that God will show him. So letter B, reread Acts 7 in light of Hebrews 11. What does this tell you about what lay in Abram's heart and mind during his early walk with the Lord?
A lot of trust.
Yeah.
You
Had-
have faith.
had a lot
Even
of,
God's promise that he would eventually live in the heavenly Jerusalem.
had faith, had trust, all right answers.
And he was very definitely willing to serve God.
Yep. Any questions before we move into day 3? All right. Let's read Genesis 12, 1 through 9. Where did we leave off?
Susie be first.
Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing.
I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran.
And Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions, and that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. Why then, when they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Morah. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land.
Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord.
And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the
Negev.
Negev.
Question 10. Some scholars believe that Abram was born around 2166 BC. And Genesis 12:4 tells us that Abram was 75 years old when he had left Haran. What kinds of things might Abram have had to give up by heeding God's call to relocate?
His home, respect of his neighbors, and comfort of what he knew.
Yep.
He was going out being old.
Yeah, had to give up basically everything that he was comfortable with, most of his possessions probably, and this would have included his inheritance as well. And I mean, he did bring Lot with him, so his nephew, but other than that, he left his whole family behind. So he was given up a lot to go where God called him to go.
I kind of looked at it, after that where 9 described where he was at. He went from a permanent dwelling to living in tents.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even say he took his one.
Probably took
Yeah, I think so.
verse 5.
Yeah, verse 5.
Oh, verse 5 again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, question 11. If you knew for certain that God was calling you into an entirely different area of service for Him, how important would your age, material possessions, extended family, house, and other factors be in deciding if you would accept God's call?
I said less important than I'm sure I would think that they were.
Yep. Yep, I'm sure that's how we would
Did
all
you take your cell phone?
That is hard for church workers to do. I respect that, you're willing to take a call and.
It's really huge for like second career guys, right? I mean, I had a classmate who was 60 probably when I was at the seminary. Our second vicar, Bill Wingfield, was 60 probably when he was our vicar,
I thought it was
right?
62 when he.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. One of Vicar's friends, the vicar over at Calvary, is a second career guy, right? He and his wife, pulled up everything and went to the seminary. But for everyone that does do that, there are many who don't, because like the wife says no. And it's like, no, God's calling me to do this, and the wife is like, no. And those kinds of things are always sad. I mean, we had one here like that. They're not members anymore here, but we had a guy who really felt called to the seminary, and the
He
wife
became
was
a
like,
deacon.
no. Yeah, wife was like, no, we can't do that, not gonna do that. And it's like, wow, I mean, yeah, so that pull of family, and she didn't wanna leave family. She refused to leave family. Family's here, and there's no guarantee you get a call back to here, so she would not leave family. She said no. And it's like, wow, I'm pretty certain God wants your husband to be a pastor. I mean, all sure looked like it, and for you just to say no to God, that's pretty bold.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few second career guys in my class. Dave isn't even the oldest one. Dion is like in his 60s. He looks like Santa Claus. He's got this really nice white beard. But yeah, Dave, just to give you his story, he's the vicar at Calvary. He and his wife are in their 50s. He was pre-seminary 30 years ago at Concordia Irvine, and she was trained DCE, so she took a call first. He ended up opening up a business with his brother, and then 30 years later was like, I think it's time to go to seminary and become a pastor. So here he is. So.
And even in the lay life, this happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when we made our first, we lived in many, many different cities. And we made a decision between the two of us, whose career would you follow? And we made a decision, who's ever opened up first. Well, it was mine, which derailed my husband's career. I mean, that's huge. That's huge to a male ego. And how do you, I mean, sometimes it worked better than others when we went, but he was always able to find something and be able to give back. And mainly what it gave him was time to volunteer at several charter churches. Who knows what we go with that?
Thank you for sharing.
It's tough.
Alright. Let's move on to question 12. What sevenfold promise does God make to faithful Abram in Genesis 12? List each promise separately.
I'll make of you a great nation.
Bless him was the next one.
Yep.
Make your name great.
That's 3. You will be a blessing. That's
Yep.
4.
I will bless those who bless you.
Yep. 2 more.
Curse those you curse.
And 1 more.
Bless all the families of the earth.
Yep. So those are all the blessings that God, or the sevenfold promise that God gives to Abraham, or Abram. And then question 13, letter A, in what way have all people on earth been blessed through Abram?
Savior?
Yep. Jesus. Yep. Because through Jesus, all people may know God and receive salvation. And so, all the way back to Abram, even before him to Noah, and even before that to Adam and Eve, there's this promise of this lineage, and Christ fulfills that original promise. And then, I don't know if we need to spend a lot of time on letter B. In what ways have you been blessed to be a blessing to others? I think one way to think about this is that Christ fills our hearts so much and blesses us so much that it can't help but overflow and pour out to others.
When I was thinking about that, I could think of it for other people that, like Nancy and others, what I had a hard time thinking about why I am. I guess my memory's gone.
Well, I think the material blessings that God gives, can be used in great ways for the sake of the gospel to bless others.
It actually made me think about what Pastor said Sunday about the altar guild needing help all this time. And people do have the skill, the talent, and probably feel like they could do it, but maybe it's too awesome to accept the job. It's a special job.
Well, that's putting a delightful spin on it. I think people are generally unwilling to give even 15 minutes of their time sometimes. Sadly. Your spin is delightful. Maybe that's absolutely correct. To which I would say it's not such an awesome thing that you are unequipped to do it. It is an awesome thing, but you are not unequipped to do it. If you feel that you are not blessed with 15 minutes to serve the Lord in such an awesome kind of a way, you probably need to rethink about your blessings. Because I think God does bless us with actually lots of time. God blesses us with lots of money. God blesses us with lots of talents and abilities. God blesses us in lots of ways in order to be a blessing to others, right? So altar guild, 15 minutes of your time, and you're a blessing to 130 people who receive the Lord's Supper on Sunday morning, right? Wow. 15 minutes of my time, and I can bless 100 plus people.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think that the issue becomes with our time or our money is when we look at our finances, or time. We're like, well, I have 0 time to spare, I have 0 money to spare.
Right,
And
because
then-
of the things that
Mhm.
I want.
Yeah, and so that's when it becomes an issue, but when you prioritize, we're like, I'm gonna give my offering first, I'm not gonna wait to see if I have an offering, or I'm gonna just give my time and then work around that, then it becomes easier to use, and you're being a blessing to others through the blessings that you've been given. So. Question 14. The Lord brought Abram to a land occupied by hostile Canaanites. This may be the reason God reaffirmed his promise to Abram in Genesis 12:17. As Abram traveled across the land to claim it and become more familiar with it, he set up temporary tents but permanent altars. What kind of permanent altars have you set up in life that you will leave the mark of your faith after you have gone? I think sometimes we don't want to answer a question like this because it's almost in a sense putting us higher. It's like we want to stay humble, and I feel like sometimes this types of question, we don't want to answer because we don't want to unintentionally be arrogant, I think.
And I looked at it as, if someone walked into my home, what would they see?
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that I have a home that reflects that I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily it's an altar, but it's, it's a reflection of what I have around me.
Mm-hmm.
We had a cross that we got from some congregation, I can't remember what it was, it wasn't here, and I put it above the doorbell, and it said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
Yeah.
I took it as sharing our faith with our grandkids, not a physical thing,
Yeah.
but a spiritually permanent thing.
Mm-hmm.
I said the same thing, yeah, pretty much the same thing, showing my faith in my family.
Yeah. Like what type of things what are our outward acts or things that we do that leave this mark? So I think it's helpful to reflect about, as we just go on in our daily lives,
Mm-hmm.
So, any questions before we move to day 4?
Yeah, it's kind of a conjecture question, but when God appeared to Abraham and gives him the promises of land, offspring, and blessings, and later on that he's going to have a son,
Mm-hmm.
in what form do you conjecture that God is giving these promises to Abraham? Is it a vision? Is he hearing the word? I mean, I don't suppose we
In
know.
a dream or whatever.
Yeah, what? And how does Abram
just
know
say he
that
appears
it's
to
going
him.
I think it could be, a vision or he actually physically appears. I would say we'd probably, if he even in a vision or just if he physically appeared before Abraham, we would say the pre-incarnate Christ. So the messenger of Yahweh, that is one of the terms of Christ in the Old Testament. So I would say it would be the pre-incarnate Christ that was delivering these messages or promises to Abraham.
But I think that's a good question, because the footnotes are different, of course, because I tried different things. But it made it sound like it was Jesus going up and down in the human form, ascending and descending. So is it Jesus, or is it God in the other form, or what?
Yahweh actually appears in human form at times too, and I think when Yahweh appears to Abram under the trees of Mamre, that is not probably angel of the Lord. I think that is Yahweh.
Are you talking about the 3 or just the 1?
Yeah, Yahweh and the 2 angels.
Yeah.
Right before the 2 angels go down and check out Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
That I believe that is not angel of the Lord. He calls him Yahweh and recognizes that this is a theophany, a God sighting. He also, Yahweh seems to appear to Moses as well, when Yahweh shows Moses the backside of his glory, so that Moses doesn't die. And then Yahweh eats with the elders, right? I mean, none of those specifically speak of the angel of Yahweh. There's other places that specifically speak angel of Yahweh, and then the person who the angel of Yahweh is talking to also recognizes them as Yahweh, right? So angel of Yahweh, Yahweh become kind of interchangeable. So I don't know, I don't think we actually know enough. We don't really know enough to know how Yahweh appears to people, when he appears to people in the Old Testament. If it's always the angel of Yahweh, the pre-incarnate, so the angel of Yahweh, it seems to be Yahweh. And so commentators think that this is the pre-incarnate, so before Jesus takes on flesh, the pre-incarnate Christ who appears. So the pre-incarnate, the before flesh, the before fleshment of the second person of the Trinity. But we really don't know. We're pretty certain of angel of Yahweh because interchangeably the person who's speaking to the angel of Yahweh calls him the angel of Yahweh, and then calls him Yahweh, and he sort of often flips back and forth between the two. Did the magazine say anything about it?
No, it just has a little section on theophanies. So it just says that.
So explain to people what a theophany is.
Oh yes, that I was finding my place.
I was like, don't skip that part.
So it says these special appearances of God among men are called theophanies, which means manifestations of God. And so it says, like the human descriptions of God mentioned above in Genesis, walking in the garden, and Abraham's vision, these theophanies try to describe for us what the prophets experienced in God's presence. They remind us that God sustains his creation and that his personal, active participation in human history continued after the fall. So it's just a manifestation of God.
And so some commentators will be really strong on every theophany is the angel of Yahweh, second person of the Trinity, because you have this theology throughout the Old Testament, no one can see God and live. Right. Well, I would submit that no one can see the second person of the Trinity and live either, unless God allows it. And when Jesus takes on human flesh, God allows it. They see Jesus, and Jesus says, anybody who's seen me has seen the Father, right? And so God allows people to see the second person of the Trinity. And I think throughout the Old Testament, whether they see the first person of the Trinity or the second person of the Trinity, I don't think really matters. God allows it. God allows these special theophanies for his purposes. And whether it's first or second, whether it's in a vision or in a person, right? None of that matters because God allows it for his purposes. And I think it's just whenever it says, now Yahweh said to Abram, we have no idea. We have no idea if that's a vision, a dream, or in person. We just have no idea. And you can say that it can be either, and it's okay with it being either because God does appear in person sometimes, and he does give vision sometimes. Mm-hmm. So when it just says Yahweh said to Abram, it's one or the other. Pretty much guarantee you it's one or the other, and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He knew it was God. Yeah. And he knew what the command was.
And if it was in person, right, then God gives that special dispensation of a theophany without the law and judgment of sinful man, right? I mean, he allows that to be seen so that whoever he speaks to is not destroyed, right? Because Yahweh appears to Abram later, right? You might just say, well, maybe God appeared to him on numerous occasions, right? Maybe this is why this is why Abram actually recognizes him under the great trees of Mamre. I mean, maybe it's very possible that Yahweh has appeared to him on at least a few occasions, and so when Yahweh shows up with two angels, he's like, "Oh, quick! Prepare bread, get the calf, slaughter it. We have to have a meal." Yahweh is present, right? He doesn't say it exactly like that, but that's the effect. He knows who he is, right? How the heck does he know who Yahweh is? Well, maybe he's appeared to him before. We just don't know. I mean, we don't know. It's a great question. I mean, I would maybe consider that Yahweh actually appears to Abram several times throughout, so Abram actually recognizes when Yahweh shows up, Abraham's like, yeah, Yahweh's here.
I would say the appearances to Abraham, there's no emphasis on his appearance or how he appeared, because the important event in Exodus is the burning bush where he reveals his name to Moses. So I think it's just an emphasizing of, like, burning bush, very important moment. These are important moments also, but his appearance is not.
But the most important thing are the promises that Yahweh gives to Abram. Not Yahweh's appearance, not what the theophany was like, not if it was a vision or in person, right? None of that, all of that stuff is actually secondary. I think you're exactly right. That's a really good answer. I think you're actually on the right track with that, because the important thing is the promises.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is the revelation of God's name and the promise of deliverance for Israel. That the importance is not what is what's going on with the theophany. The importance is what the message of Yahweh is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think you're exactly right.
Any other things before we move on to day 4? Alright. Why don't we read Genesis 12, 10 to 20?
Now there was famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance.
When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you.
When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman was very beautiful, and the princes of Pharaoh saw her. They praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house.
And for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife.
So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell them that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.
I think question 15 is an interesting question by the author, because it says defend your answer, like we're going to have a hardcore debate or something. But it just talks about that. The question is, do you think Abram's departure for Egypt during the famine demonstrated a lack of faith in God's promise, or was it simply common sense? Defend your answer. What do you guys think?
Probably a combination of both.
Yeah.
He had a family to feed.
Yeah.
Well, I put lack of faith because God promised him he was going to have all these descendants and everything else. And he said, this is the land I'm giving you, that he would have figured out a way to take care of it.
Yeah.
I mean, and then it goes further later on when he tells his wife to say you're my sister, because he doesn't believe God would not kill him. Well, if God lets him be killed by Pharaoh, he's not gonna, get the next, the start of the chain going.
See, I think that it's more, I think it's part of that. I think the real emphasis is that he lied about Sarah, and I think that's what his lack of faith was in, not that God would provide. I'm not sure, although it could be either way. We're just arguing about, did Abraham going into Egypt show a lack of faith that God would provide, or was he just going out of common sense to get food during the famine?
Isn't
It's
that
what
how
you do.
God
Common
provided?
sense.
Yeah.
Jacob's whole family comes down to Egypt during the famine.
Mm-hmm.
They go to Egypt to get food on a couple of occasions, and then Joseph's like, why would you stay why would you stay in Canaan? It's a barren wasteland. Come down to Egypt and have all the food that you want, because I'm second in command, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I probably common sense.
Yeah,
God doesn't say,
Yeah.
so, because here would be the thing, right? So if you're a Christian and you believe that God will provide, and you live on the coast of Florida right now, that means that you're just going to go home with no water, no electricity, no insurance money, and you're gonna do whatever you can to allow God to provide food and water and shelter and all that. Well, no, God gives us common sense, right? That's probably not the best example, but you get laid off from your job. Well, God will provide. Yeah, get up and go find another job. That's how God's going to provide, right? So God does give us common sense to be able to act in a world where He provides through means, right? So God can provide directly, but more often God provides through means. And so He gives us brains and intelligence to use the means that He provides through. I really think Abraham's sin is he lies about Sarah because he doesn't want the king to kill him and take his wife away. So he gives his wife away
And I
to
think
have sex with Pharaoh.
I think that's what demonstrates the lack of faith in Abram. Not that he went to Egypt, but he lied about
Right.
Sarah and that God
He
would
gives
protect
his
him.
he gives his wife away as a wife to Pharaoh, essentially. I mean, I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
You like prostituted your wife so that you wouldn't get killed. That's the sin. That's the sin. That prostituting your wife so that you don't get killed. And this isn't the only time he does it. He does it later on again. Right? With Abimelech, isn't it? Or he does it with another king later on. He does the same thing. It's like, wow.
Yeah, I can't remember the name.
And though, just think about this, how old Sarah was.
Yes.
65.
Yeah, he's 75.
She was 65.
Later on, she's even older. And she's fair and beautiful, and the king wants her as wife or concubine or whatever. It's like, what the heck? How